What's up, guys? Mitch from RespectMyRegion.com here with another episode of the North American Weed Tour podcast, taking a look at cannabis across the map and beyond. Today, we have special guest Holly Alberti, Senior Director of Marketing at Berkshire Roots in Massachusetts. How are you doing today, Holly?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you, Mitch?
I am doing great, joining you from the exact opposite side of the map. Man, I know we recently got to connect in person out there during Boston Cannabis Week. We'll talk about that here in a little bit later. But we usually kick these off talking about your history, introducing yourself and your history around the plant. Or if you don't really want to diverge or be vulnerable with that, you can talk about your history or origin within this industry.
Sure. I'm very passionate about the plant, so I don't have a problem talking about that. Years ago, I got involved in just this industry as a whole. I'm really just trying to be an advocate for patients because that was, the marketplace that we had at that time. Or actually, it was before we even had a market for medical here in Massachusetts. And there was some small groups that I would, speak with or work with, and then sure enough, got involved with the medical program here in Massachusetts, getting that on the ballot initiative, and doing everything that I could to be able to convince folks that the sky wouldn't fall if they were to introduce a medical program. I really just got involved in a couple of different ways, helping launching some businesses. I went through an incubator program in Colorado with a startup that I launched, which was the first startup for cannabis companies. I spent some time in Colorado. I spent some time in California. And, I really just saw this as an opportunity for me to use my voice and communicate some of these potential benefits when it comes to cannabis, as it was still really demonized at that point. We have made a lot of headway in the last 12 years. But there's still some stereotypes and some thoughts out there that might not be correct or maybe misinformed or uneducated. And I really just thought of it that I was at the Chamber of Commerce. So I was a membership director, and I had a platform where I could talk to other professionals and really try to bring some, a different perspective into the mix and have those conversations, in that role. So fast forward a bunch of years, and here I am, I'm running marketing, which has been my focus in the cannabis industry over the last 10 years plus.
Man, that is awesome. And it's very unique. And we were talking about that right before we started. It's very unique to have someone whose story combines multiple markets multiple state markets within this industry, being that this industry is so new. And it's very, very unique to know somebody that has operated in 3 different markets. That is very unique. So I really look forward to getting a little bit more of your perspective on this industry. So let's start a little bit of like Berkshire Roots. Could you give me a little bit of the history and the origin of the company there?
Absolutely. So Berkshire Roots was one of the first vertically integrated cannabis companies to start up here in Massachusetts. Like the name says, Berkshire Roots, it's in the Berkshires. So all the way to the west, farther than a lot of people in Massachusetts actually think where Western Massachusetts actually resides, is a great spot in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And that's where Berkshire Roots started with their vertically integrated location. So their cultivation facility, their retail location, and that was under the medical program. And then later in 2019, when the adult use program came on board, they did move forward with that. So they had their adult use and medical program. And then in 2020, we actually had the amazing opportunity. It was July of 2020 and opening up the Boston location. So that's a retail only location in Boston. And it's right in Eastie, as it's known in Massachusetts. So they really prided themselves when they were starting out as really keeping that medical focus. It was really important as they were transitioning into the recreational or adult use side of things, that they kept that attention as well as that connection to the medical community. And it's been an absolute experience and pleasure working with the team there. I joined on in July. I'm sorry, yeah, July, the beginning of July of 2020. And so I literally came on board. We opened up the East Boston location, and here we are. It feels like it was only a couple of months ago, but as you know, it's a little over a year and a half at this point.
It's been quite the year and a half, I mean, you started a little bit in July, COVID was still going on, but that definitely has had time stand still, but also speed up is what it personally feels like. And so coming from an industry in Massachusetts in the medical where you had to be vertically integrated to adult use, which has kind of opened it up, but also, going from a patient model where there's a real cap on your potential consumer base or patient, patients, not necessarily consumers at that point, opening up to adult use where now anyone over the age is a consumer. That widens the demand, but the supply might not quite be there. So what were some of the challenges early in that market, and are you guys still dealing with them in terms of supply and demand in the Massachusetts market?
Yeah, I mean, to the point, as a medical consumer, there are a lot of barriers to entry. It costs. You have to be put onto a list. There's a lot of reasons why folks wouldn't want to be on or part or participation in this medical program. So with adult use coming on board, the team really identified what they would need to be able to make sure that they had enough. There was some limiting in the early days, and that happened really in a bunch of locations. Throughout the state, the way that it went from medical to adult use, there was only a few licenses that had come on board, right out the get-go. So we saw really long lines at some of these different operators because, supply and demand. You've got east of the Mississippi, essentially at that time, recreational cannabis or adult use cannabis. So there was a lot of demand. For Berkshire Roots, it was really something, again, that they worked closely with, internally to make sure that they were producing enough. Obviously, the canopy size and what we have at our fingertips is going to, dictate that. But then, of course, working with some of the other partners in the state where we can wholesale to each other is always an opportunity and a way for us to bring in additional variety for our customers and our medical patients, and as well as to kind of spread that, that availability and that supply around. So, for Berkshire Roots, over the course of where we were in 2019 to here we are in almost 2022, it's been there's some ebbs and flows, of course, but been able to maintain it really well.
And what do you envision, because you've had some time in some other markets, what do you envision are kind of the pros and cons of a vertically integrated market as opposed to, another market? California, you can have vertical integration, but it's not, you don't have to, right? Like it's kind of, some people do, some people don't. Massachusetts is obviously going that way, but its roots are very much embedded in a vertically integrated market.
Yeah, and I think, in my personal opinion, I think that that's the way that we came to be with some of this legislation, as a voter initiative ballot that was for the medical program, right? So it was like we, the people, pushed that. And then it was all of a sudden, we had an additional campaign for regulation of cannabis and an adult use recreational level. And I think that, it was just by default of how things were set up in the system, so that, that was the way the licensing procedure had gone. So, I think that there's a huge adjustment happening right now in the market where there are these additional licenses, retail only, manufacturing only. And I can't tell you the amount or the count, I apologize, of how many retailers are open across the state, but there's more and more every day. And the CCC, our Cannabis Control Commission, is actively working through the log of applications to bring those guys on board or bring these different programs up and running. So I think that, we'll see some different potentials or different opportunities for folks in the future. But I do think that it's maybe just a natural progression of the market. We'll see what happens in the next couple of years. But I think it's obviously advantageous for all to have those multiple licenses and just more choices at the end of the day for the consumer. It's definitely going to help us all, I think, as retailers as well, become stronger with the variety and different partnerships.
Yeah. I can't agree more on what you said. It's definitely to the advantage of everyone to have more selection. And I like the free market, if you will, but the ability to have vertical integration. Like I was sharing right before we started, I live in Washington State where like vertical integration is like against the rules, and which is great. I mean, it provides a great selection and there's some pros and cons of that, but it also inhibits a few things where you find, brands that build a really good name from maybe the cultivation side and then jump into retail and just have more to offer, or vice versa, retail side that really builds a brand on that and is able to bring in something else. And it just creates cool dynamics. And in other industries, it's allowed. So it's weird when they restrict it or make it, only one way or the other. I'm not sure. But I agree. I think it looks great. So you guys are obviously vertically integrated. You have 2 retail locations, manufacturing and cultivation. What are some of the main or popular products that you guys offer that you also curate your guys' self?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it all starts in the garden with all of the flower that we cultivate, and then that's manufactured into our amazing other products. We actually just opened a new lab. We were operating in a limitations on what we could use for our processing, and we just moved into a C1D1 space this last couple of months. So it's really amazing to see what the lab team can produce. We have a great director, Kayla, who has been producing a lot of amazing new concentrates, which I've been excited to see come into the environment. And we also, again, it all stems from that flower, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the edibles that we've been producing have really we really focus on innovation, and we're always looking to be able to bring new products, again, in the best manner to our customers. And Berkshire Roots was known and has won a couple of awards for their chews, which, I know that gummies tend to be a category that I feel like people can relate to. We see them, obviously. It's a familiar product for a lot of people. And so we had some really great results with our standard chews, and those are made actually in full spectrum availability as well. And then we have some higher CBD ratios. And we took those kind of to the next level because we saw that a lot of folks were enjoying them, but we wanted to try to get some better ingredients, recognizing that there's all sorts of allergies as well, and we want to be conscious to that. So we've developed this new it's a chew, but it melts in your mouth. It's like a fruit pate, and it's called the Roots Fruits. And it's, in a little square. So it kind of looks like a gummy, but when you put it in your mouth, it literally just melts in your mouth. And it's got an amazing flavor, and it's super limited ingredients. I believe there's like 5 ingredients in there. So again, trying to continue to innovate and go down that pathway of just creating better things. That's one of the things that I'm very excited about. We really do, again, on the edible side, I'm obviously a fan. The chocolate that we use for our chocolates, which we have a couple of different bars that we produce. We have just our 413 chocolate bar in milk chocolate and dark chocolate. And then we've got another chocolate bar that actually is a combination of cold brew coffee from a local roastery, which coffee, cannabis, chocolate, like 3 of my favorite things all smushed together in a nice little package. The cold brew chocolate bar is really just, again, the quality premium chocolate that we use really shines through. And I'm a big fan of that one, but it all stems from that flower. And we've got amazing folks in our cultivation that make sure that all of our plants are handled with, the utmost care, but also a scrutiny and level of just the sanitization. As you know, cultivation spaces can be vulnerable, and they have to be treated with the respect that they deserve as well. So our team does a fantastic job at making sure that from the genetics all the way through to getting them into our curing department, and then from there to trim and our cultivation team, all the way through, really, it does make a difference and shine through when you kind of go that extra level.
Yeah, and I know from talking to people on the streets, your guys' name came up when it came, when I was asking around for flower. Your guys' name definitely came up on the streets when the streets were talking as someone that was producing good flower out there. I want to ask one more, or take it back to the edibles for a second.
Yeah.
I thought that was unique. The Roots fruit, you said it melts in your mouth, which I'm not understanding all the science of it, but I believe that also provides like a sublingual distribution of THC, right? Where when you eat a regular thing and it goes to your stomach, it distributes the THC that way. But I think when it melts in your mouth, I think it distributes the THC or CBD in a little bit different way.
You're correct.
Okay, yeah,
It passes that blood-brain barrier quicker and sublingually, right? And you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, I had a chef break that down for me, and I was asking him, "What's your favorite type of edible?" And he had said, "Well, it depends, what kind of distribution method." And I was like, "Oh, wow, I never even knew, but that makes sense." Are you guys restricted? I believe when I was out there, you guys are restricted to 5 milligrams per dose on an edible. Is that true, or
On the adult use or recreational side, that is correct.
okay,
So they would have to be, denoted and dosed out at the 5 milligram. And then we have a maximum on that at 100 milligrams. So the
okay,
chocolate bar would be total of 100 milligrams, and each little piece would be five.
got it. And then, but when you do individually wrapped edibles, do they need to be 5 milligrams a piece? Is that correct?
Yeah, for the adult use side, they would,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, that's how they kind of want everything to be identified and packaged. And then, of course, it's few and far between for the things that are individually wrapped. Even our cookies, we had a 40 milligram one solid cookie on the medical
Okay.
side. We had to create. We actually call them cookie clones because it's just a replica of the 40 milli in a 5 milligram cookie. And so
Okay.
now we're able to produce that and sell that to our adult use recreational consumer.
Yeah, that's very unique, and it's unique to see, like, even again comparing to other states, like it just, I mean, even on the beverage side in Washington, the 100 milligram beverage is the highest selling beverage, but when you look at California, the can, the 2.5, the 5 milligram is the highest selling beverage, I think, by volume. So, are you guys restricted on beverage count to be 5 milligrams per beverage for adult use as well?
Yeah, so that's I think that for newer consumers, again, it's not an issue, but we have some folks that are looking for, higher caliber. Again, on the medical side, you can get a seltzer that's maybe 17, 20 milligrams, total in the can. But recreational, you'll see, five is the max. A lot of the companies too, we have a few out here that are creating ratios. So it's higher CBD, or there's a 1-to-1, or something of that nature. Again, I think that we're still nascent in the market,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of education and then a lot of new consumers that are coming on board. So that works perfect because it's an easier, place to start. There's a couple companies out there that have maybe like a syrup that you could add. So
Mm.
you're able to maybe take that ride on your, what works best for you. So if it's 20 milligrams total in that little, again, that would only be allowed on the adult use side. I'm sorry, on the medical side. But you could increase the amount. So if you want to put the whole 20 milligrams into your cup of, soda, you could do that.
Yeah, and it's great, and I like how you brought that up for the new consumer, and especially in a market like your guys that's new, and that's one of the, I guess, the biggest issues, right, when it comes to cannabis, especially edibles, is like proper dosing, making sure people don't get too high. The stigma around edibles is, for good reason, for homemade brownies, of getting laid out flat and not knowing what's in your dose. But I think, the beverage market especially is for a lot of new consumers. It's familiar to, alcohol or something else if you're getting into cannabis. And you're absolutely right. It's great to ease your way in with a 5 milligram beverage instead of, playing with fire with a 100 milligram, but it does create some issues for the legacy user that is a higher dose. That's like, I'm not trying to drink 10 seltzers to get where I'm trying to go, but if you have legal cannabis available, that is the biggest blessing, and you can't have too many complaints after the fact.
It's the truth. We see a lot of folks who are coming in that say, it's my first time, consuming cannabis, or it's the first time consuming cannabis in 20, 30 years. So we recognize that, again, this, because it has been prohibited from us for so long, there's still a lot of newer users out there, and we just want to meet everybody where they're at, right? So if we have somebody who comes in and they've been a medical patient for a long time, or they're looking for something that's, higher strength, there's ways to work around that too, with like a distillate applicator, right? You can get a
Mm.
gram of we call it an applicator, but the dispenser, the syringe style one, you can be able to, again, create something DIY style. And so a lot of times we'll work with the patient, the customer, and just educate them of what their options might be.
Absolutely. And so, one thing I wanted to ask with, adult use being relatively new to Massachusetts, and you guys, and for the East Coast, kind of guys have been leading the charge for that upper northeast of adult use cannabis. I know New Jersey, New York gets a lot of the hype, but they're not quite there yet, and you guys are operating. So where do you see Massachusetts fitting into the legalization and the cannabis kind of culture in the Northeast?
It's I think it's gonna be interesting to definitely watch New York. There's a little bit of time, obviously, before they can have everything up and ready, but I am excited about some of their their on-site consumption, social lounge situation, because again, that was something that I did experience at Harborside, and it's been something that the Massachusetts market has been um, missing. And we really don't have any locations where people can go to consume their medicine, their cannabis. And I think that is a little bit of a disconnect. I think it's great to see, and of course, being my home state and being in other states and participating in this space is like, it was amazing to see us be the first. And it was really great to kind of see the initiative that they'd taken within some specific areas. I do think that we have room to grow. There's a lot of opportunity, obviously, in multiple states and how we can get better and what we can do differently. But, I think that for Massachusetts, Boston has always kind of had that, you know, just a launch pad, whether that's on the
Mm.
tech sector or different startups. There's a lot that's happening in the city, and then outside of this in the remainder of the state, there's a lot of amazing companies that have started here or are based here. And I just think that innovation again is something that we'll continue to see as the market within Mass. And then of course I'm just curious of all the different brands, these individual brands that are kind of, coming on board. It's really awesome to see some of the different, the different groups getting together and what they're bringing to the table, pushing it again, bringing that to the next level of what's available for the customer.
Absolutely. And so obviously, I know you guys take a lot of pride in your products and your in-house brand that you sell at the store. But what are some other brands, that our customers may ask for by name or have really done a good job carving out an audience? Doesn't have to say your favorite, or by saying some and not saying some doesn't exclude others, but just some of the brands that are carving out a name or demand out there.
Definitely. So, I'll kind of answer on both spectrums, right? So, like the new consumer, I think Incredibles has done an incredible job on getting their brand out there, right? So, as a larger operator in multiple states, they've got streaming videos on Roku platforms and all these different areas. So the consumer is really getting that awareness, right? They're looking for some of these things because they're being exposed to them, so they're familiar with them. I think that's for the new consumer. They're limited at where they're digesting their information. Like there's the Leaflies out there. There's the publications that are specific to cannabis. Of course, there's social media. And it all depends on where that consumer is living, right? And so if they read Boston Magazine and they see an ad for Berkshire Roots, in our East Boston location, like that might be their connection back to it. But I think that, for the most part, we're starting to see, just I apologize because my train of thought is going down another path
You're
now.
good.
And I had said that to you when we started. I was going to, get kind of caught up on that. But I think that a lot of these larger brands have that ability to kind of spread the awareness in one direction. So that obviously from a marketing standpoint, you get in front of the customer recognizes, and then conversions, right? I think for some of the other brands that maybe have a connection into, say, California market. So like Blue River, which is known in California, obviously when they came into the Massachusetts market, or Cookies, Cookies has a very well-known brand. So coming into the Massachusetts market, it's easier for them to kind of have that attrition already. So we've been really excited to work with a lot of those folks. Lowell Smokes, actually, I was excited to see their pre-rolls, come through, because I remember what they were doing in Cali, and just appreciated the small things in their joint containers and stuff like that. Obviously seeing how they adapt their packaging and putting it into our state as well has been really, fascinating for me specifically. But I think that we have folks that will come in, and if they have a connection, for Blue River, for instance, we've had a few people who saw that we had that, and it's very limited in the state right now, and they had asked for that, per name, or like as I mentioned, the Incredibles, or some of the other like larger plays that are out there that are just getting in front of the customer. So it's been really interesting to see. how people are presenting themselves and being able to get in front of the customer. Again, we do have a lot of limitations from a marketing standpoint. So a lot of times, for a Massachusetts-based company like Coast Cannabis, they're located pretty close to the coast, and they're a smaller operator. They're a great business. They have amazing products. They did win some High Times awards, so that additional stamp gave them some additional elevation and exposure. And that's something that folks would come in and say, hey, do you have the Coast S'mores bar or something of that nature? Which we love, of course, having that customer come in and having a little bit of education. But again, we do have folks that come in and they're just like, hey, I'm looking for this, and this, or I'm looking to help this. And then, of course, we work with them best and identify what would make sense.
Yeah, and there's a few things I want to revisit some of those marketing limitations, but first I want to build off of that last point is, in being a newer market, obviously coming from Colorado, having experience in Colorado, which is the first market to have recreational cannabis, and then California, which is the most, although they're not anywhere close to the first of having recreational cannabis, they are the most mature cannabis market out there. I think it's safe to say I don't know how to describe that properly, but cannabis has been normalized and accessible in that state for so long. It's rooted in the culture. But for you guys to get adult use, and again, being the first out there, so you don't have this kind of influence of brands and education and information, right, coming out of the black market or limited medical market where there's a lack of education, a lack of distribution of education. What are you kind of seeing with the consumer base of just around their understanding of cannabis, and kind of where do you feel they're at on their journey and their path to understanding this plant?
Yeah, again, I think there's definitely a spectrum of consumers that we see. There's definitely heavily educated folks that come in and drop knowledge. And then there's consumers that are really confused about all the different cannabinoids. They've heard about CBD. They don't quite understand the difference between THC, CBD. They have no idea that there's other cannabinoids that exist. They're not familiar with the endocannabinoid system. There's a lack of education. Again, and that's just because it's been restricted from our fingertips for so long. And I think that, as anything, with its footwear or apparel, trends are what generate that, consumer to maybe go a certain direction. So if they hear CBD over and over again and they're getting advertised really for it, we do have questions about that all the time. But again, I think that they come at it from, there's a lot of differences too, when we talk about how we, I'm not the best person to speak to this, but from the regulation of hemp versus cannabis, the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture oversees the MDARS, the governing body for hemp. The CCC is cannabis. So you can go to a store like, your gas station bodega, and there would be CBD flower and gummies for sale. The customer doesn't understand that there's a difference or how that's regulated or what's going on. And they just don't understand why can't I just buy this here? And what's different about it? Why is this not going to be the same as, something that you guys are producing here? Right? So there's a lot of confusion about that. And then of course we have people who, and maybe these aren't just the new consumers, but we have a lot of people who are chasing THC levels. So, we have on our packaging, we have TAC, which is total active cannabinoids, which can confuse people as well. But we have a lot of folks who come in and they just, what's your highest THC? And we really do try to provide education about just the ensemble effect, the understanding of that there are more cannabinoids than just THC, and try to be able to provide them with some information. We had a blueberry cookies strain that was, a lower test, and I say lower tester based off of the standards. It was like 14% THC. And we had some people that just turned up their noses like, I can't be bothered. That's so low. And they were blown away after consuming it because the terpene profile, again, gave a different effect. So we were really excited to see some of those consumers who we just said, hey, this is just an educational piece. We just want to tell you a little bit of information. And then when we opened up their mind and they were willing to try the product, they actually saw like the proof in the pudding. So I think that that was, a little bit more concrete for them to say, maybe there is a little bit more validity to this. And we're starting to see more, like I'll say Leafly, I think just put an article out about it. So we're starting to see more articles coming out about these misconceptions of, what's good or what's the best or what's going to get me a certain way. So we do see that a lot as well. And then I think that, overall people are just like, still questioning like, how do I consume? What's the proper way to do this? And we offer a couple of different solutions too. We have actually a virtual customer care team. So our customer care team is available on our website, like during our hours of operation. So like our little chat bubble, there's a person behind there that's there to be able to provide any, no question is ever out of place or stupid. We want people to feel like they have a place to come and just ask the question that maybe they're jogging around in their brain like, oh, no one would ask this question. It's like, no, a million people have. Please come, ask us. And we do offer phone consultations if folks aren't, savvy with this type of technology and want to be able to have a conversation with somebody. And then somebody that needs a little bit more information or maybe is experience a product for the first time or needs to know how to use something, they can get on a virtual consultation with one of our customer care folks as well and go through a demonstration. You're familiar with the Dab Locator because that originated in the West Coast.
Yeah.
So the Dab Locator is this little dosed mechanism, which we're excited, to have that filled with our great extracts. Orange Chameleon actually is one of them. And we had some folks that just didn't know how. There's a little click, you click it a couple times and that doses out, a measured dose for you. But again, it's a new device. It's confusing. It's a little overwhelming. It's concentrates. People might not understand. And sometimes the directions maybe are, not as cumbersome as they should be on the boxes because we're limited at the space. So something like that, we want people to be comfortable after they've purchased that. And we want them to be comfortable before they come in and purchase and get all of that information. So we really try to do as much as we can to alleviate some of those questions that people have about cannabis, whether they're a new user or, a connoisseur.
Yeah. And it's unique, when people are too nervous to ask questions, but when you go to Google, I don't know if you've ever done that, where you start typing in like what is or how is, and you see the top asked questions, that, if you ever are scared that you have a dumb question, go try that and see the level of questions that are trending on Google, and you'll feel more comfortable. But it is unique, the THC conversation. I honestly just had this epiphany while you're talking, because when I was out there in Mass, like, when I went into a couple dispensaries, not your guys's, and I don't want to name them, I was like, what's your guys' best weed? And like, well, I just organized them by THC percentage. And I'm like, all right, I get most people come in here, but that's not what I asked. All right. I don't need that's the last thing that I want to consider. And they just like wouldn't get past, the bud tender wouldn't get past that. I'm like, what is it with this market? But when I look at California, and that's, again, we just said it's the most educated, elevated market.
Yeah.
THC still rules in that, like, no matter what the store thinks, no matter what people in the industry, they feel like they're screaming at a wall. It doesn't matter. But the stores literally can't even buy weed unless it has a certain level, because it won't sell. Even in the, whether it's an infant or a mature market, this THC percentage level just is plaguing us so heavily right now.
I know. And I may take a campaign of all like the heavy hitters in the industry to be like, hey, it's not all about THC. And I think we'll get there. I have hopes. I have this conversation on a regular basis. I think we'll get there, but it may not be as quick as I would like it to be.
Absolutely. And because that's, some of the cultivators I know are like, dude, the strain is killing it, but I can't get it to test above 19% and nobody will buy it. So, I can't even produce it. And it's like, I want to smoke that flower. I want that flower to be produced in bulk. Like, God damn it.
What do you mean? Exactly.
Yeah, get these people up there. So, I want to take it back a little bit to the market, the limitations around marketing for the Massachusetts market. Everywhere has things that are unique to them. But I know you guys have had some, like most things when you start out can be quite restrictive, and some things not quite make sense, and then they provide further clarification. But what are some of the limitations you guys are faced with out there? What are some of the ones that you guys have overcame since the market came online?
Yeah. So, again, it's just it's an early space. So, as the commission figures some of these pieces out, we'll get updates to the regulations. But early on, this shirt that I'm wearing really was. We weren't clear if it was allowed as operators, and so people were producing apparel with their logo on them or different components, and we weren't able to sell them. We weren't able to give them away. There was just some gray area that folks weren't really 100% sure. Some people were doing it, some people weren't. But again, that doesn't mean that that's
Hmm.
okay. We got an update at the beginning of this year from the regulators that basically alleviated and helped to identify like what we can and cannot put our brand name onto and then sell or use as like a promotional tool. And so like a lighter, like a branded lighter, it was an item that was in question for a really long time. So the clarification at the beginning of 2021 was really helpful so that we can, and again, from a marketing standpoint, like I want people to walk around with our
Hmm.
brand name. That's like any apparel company that's out there, any brand that's out there. It's like you're a walking ambassador. And I was really excited to be able to see that this was something that they recognized and understood. So, we've produced some items and been able to, a keychain, for instance, like stickers. I mean, come on, like everybody's got slaps out there and we want to be able to have those items. So having those additional clarifications have been helpful. Billboards was another big area like of question. There was, could we do it? Could we not do it? And then there was maybe one or two that explored. And again, billboards are a pretty expensive, monthly spend. So when you're looking at your overall budget, and there's a chance that it could get taken down, like you want to make sure you do the due diligence. So I think there was some hesitation until we saw, here in Massachusetts, we have the Mass Pike. If you go down the pike at this
Hmm.
point, every other billboard is cannabis. And we definitely saw an increase of that in 2020 specifically. I think the nature of the market and how everything was shifting, being an essential industry, oddly enough, even though we were illegal not too long ago,
Hmm.
had this really interesting effect on how we participate with advertising in general. And like I said, now people have billboards. We've got some billboards as well, and it's really great to be able to see how we can get that messaging out there. As you probably are very well aware, social media is
Hmm.
a challenge. We've lost our Instagram handle. We've gotten currently shadow banned on a lot of platforms as well. Like the notifications that come up and say you're against the community guidelines and your post has been taken down if you do this anymore is a regular occurrence. And it's super stressful because it's another channel that we communicate, we educate, but it's basically, and this is not specific just to the Massachusetts
Hmm.
market, of course, but we are seeing that that's an area that we just get the pushback on. And mass, we only are allowed to we can't do any promotions for the adult use recreational consumer. So medical, we want to do a buy one get one for $1 on a special item, we can do that. In the rec space, we can't do any discounts, deals, promotions, specials, or anything like that. um,
So you can't
so
even
that's
have daily or weekly deals or industry discounts.
no, no, it's we're allowed to give a discount to our employees.
Mm.
So it's again, when you're talking about like any other industry, and I always use the footwear industry because I came from that at one point in my life. It's like, here is your item, you want to market it and get the information out there. How do you do so? Not the same, not at
Mhm.
all. You really have to kind of be creative, think outside the box. I use the word square peg round hole on a regular basis
Mm.
just because sometimes, even though we want to participate with an email campaign, maybe the technology or integration's not there like every other space would have to see that customer journey. So if the person clicks on the email, clicks on an item, goes to our website, makes the purchase, has the purchase, we follow up with an email. That's traditional in every other industry. And some of the restrictions and integrations and pieces that we're facing here, and a lot of it is the nascency of this industry, like we will get there. But some of it is regulatory. Text messaging has been a challenge. And again, not being able to use some of those terms, we really have a hard time disseminating the communication when we can't use, cannabis, marijuana, weed as a descriptor, edibles, THC. There's a lot of terms that won't go through certain platforms. And again, it just makes it so that you have to think outside the box and be a little bit creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And like some of those are not unique to Massachusetts. Some of those are really unique. And what you said with the merchandise, I'm glad you guys have been able to get clarity, because I believe you guys can sell merchandise at the dispensary now, correct?
We can now. Yes, this is a newer thing. So like I said, at the beginning of the year, I feel like the year again has gone by so quickly, but slow at some point. That was a new introduction so that we can sell branded items. We're not allowed to put our brand name onto an item that would, assist in, so like a pipe. We wouldn't be able to brand the pipe. That those specifics are kind of laid out, and they did give us some additional clarification, which has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, that's strange. Like in Washington, for example, a dispensary can't sell merch at their dispensary. And so often you'll see a dispensary with a CBD or glass shop next door that's a separate business line. You could have, blah, blah, blah's cannabis, and you have blah, blah, blah's glass next door that sells the glass, sells the branded merch, sells the non-THC CBD. And it's like you have to have two licenses, two businesses. And it just blows my mind on why it's like that. And I love when I go to markets like your guys, when this is a great store, it's really well branded. Oh, and there's clothing. It like makes it seem more professional and just like a cooler experience. It feels more like a regular store than this is just a weed store and that's the only thing it's here for.
Exactly. I completely agree. And I mean, one of the things, I mean, you see this everywhere else, is like you can bring in different things to art on the walls to highlight some different artists and stuff like that, just to have some different pieces in there. But it is a little bit of a disconnect when you think about, how folks are engaging in the dispensary. And again, I think we have a lot of opportunity to improve upon this, and hopefully, it's a new market.
Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed, that because it was a new market and because, COVID happened so quickly after, like, your guys' market got adult use, and then it didn't even really get a chance to really ramp up to like full scale of production and excitement before the world got locked down. And so when I went out there and I met you in person, Boston Cannabis Week was like kind of not the first. I know there's a couple events before that, but it was really like the first time the world somewhat started to open up again. And like your guys' community, like excitement was just a word that I consistently use, because that's just what you felt it, you heard it. So what has the culture and community been like now with adult use? And now I won't say COVID's over or dying, but it's, the world's starting to stabilize, I guess, a little bit.
It's so true. I mean, we did some smaller events at our location in Pittsfield, like our I call it the Cannabis Campus, because that's, we got the location right there, our cultivation. We got a great parking lot area, so we have some space. And we did a 420 event all outside. We did a 710 event all outside. And you could see there was still some hesitation. Like we couldn't have any place where people were congregating. We did have a couple of food trucks, but you weren't allowed to like eat in line. Basically you got your free sub or your free empanada, but you had to kind of like take it to your car. And I think some of those experiences, of course, were all very specific to COVID. And it was, we did what we could, right? The adaptability is like the name of the game in cannabis. Like if you're looking for a set of rules, like go someplace else, because you're always going to be changing and adapting. Mm-hmm. And so I think that our customers appreciated that we were just trying to do a little something. We actually had, we've been inviting a lot of musicians to play while the weather is good. It's 31 degrees right now, so not really cool to play outside, but in the warmer time, we would invite musicians to play outside. So if there was a line, and we've again, try to innovate and create different ways so that we don't have folks standing outside. But in July, it's fine. People enjoy that. And bringing in some of those different elements just to kind of like make it fun, and be able to provide, just something different. But I think that with COVID in Boston Cannabis Week, like you said, there were a few other events that had been prior, but that was the first time that event was more, community level, where it was music and entertainment and cannabis, like all coming together in like a really cool space. And that was just super, like you could feel the excitement, like you said, like it was like this vibration of just people being able to consume cannabis, like we'll say that, right? That's usually not something that can happen in a public space, but that was happening, and people were getting together and coming together and being able to showcase and just talk face to face, right? Everybody's been virtual, everybody's been zooming and doing all of this, connecting digitally, but it's different when you get to see somebody and you get to, just be there and feel that transfer of energy. And it was a great week. It was a week long, as you know. It was a lot of different activities, a lot of different events, and it was great to just be able to see everybody adapt again in whichever way they could, so that they could be present and be able to bring their brands to the community, and just do it in a really cool, fun, exciting way. They did Boston Cannabis Week last year virtually, so I was I spoke on a marketing panel, and there was definitely some different webinars that you could join in, but it wasn't the same. The really cool part about the digital piece is that we get to bring the community from all different places kind of into our living rooms or our backyards, right? But there's just a difference when you can get together and connect on that personal level.
Yeah, it's there's digital is great, but there's no way to replace that. And I think cannabis is such a community focused, I don't know what subject topic, like, before legalization, that's, we shared in community over this plant. The community got this plant legalized. I'm definitely, if you listen to all of our podcast episodes, I say that like almost every time, so I am a broken record, but it is just it's so important. Like cannabis and community just go hand in hand. And so being able to get out there, and whether you're sharing a joint or just sharing ideas, and everyone has their own personal joint, or whatever floats your boat, it is just such an important fact of, now this is an industry, but pre-industry, just this, I don't know, this plant and this passion that we share. Community is just so important to that. How has the culture around cannabis shifted in Massachusetts since legalization? I'm sure in some ways not at all, and I'm sure in some ways it's been tidal waves.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the tidal wave is like, having a conversation 10 years ago, even, or 5 years ago, you'd get some looks. There's definitely a mentality of folks who just, they didn't think of this as something that would be legal, or, an item that they're looking at. So, it's interesting, because I think that I'm not faced with as many, oh my God, you work in weed, like that kind of like level of like shock. It's more common. I feel like people are more open to have conversations. I can't tell you how many people, will talk to like my stepmom and say, you use cannabis, this is this, blah," and oh my gosh, and that just creates this, again, on the community side, I think that you tend to buy things from people that like, and trust, right? That's like marketing 101. And when your family, your community, your close people are talking about their interactions and their experiences, that's a great thing. It's really helpful. I mean, granted, to bring back around to those like horrible brownie experiences, like we don't want people to talk about the bad experiences, but we also don't want them to ever have that, right? So education's helpful. If someone says like, oh, I had this experience, maybe that's a learning tool too. Like, don't do what I did. And I just think that it's more accepted, like bottom line. I don't think that it's as faux pas as it used to be, or as, risky or whatever. When I was, doing my my prior to my cannabis years, and I would go and speak at an event, or bring up the topic about cannabis at my local town meeting, for instance. There was that level of like, how could you? There's a opiate epidemic, and how could you ever want to bring drugs legal? And this sky falling mentality, this reefer madness mentality where, it just is like, listen, let me provide you with some information and some education. Like, here are some studies that have been done in Israel and outside of the United States. And here are some studies that are being done now in the United States. So more and more as we can, provide this information, it becomes more mainstream, it becomes more approachable. And the conversation isn't like it was, like I said, 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds about right, and then that's the exciting thing, for many of us that have, again, shared a passion around this or been consumers of this plant, whether it's for recreation or medicinally for so long, the destigmatification of cannabis since it's been legal. I mean, we still have a long ways to go, but it's now acceptable table talk in a lot of households, to some extent, to where you might be excused from the table years ago if you brought it
E-
up. It's
Exactly.
it's an interesting thing, and so one of the topics that constantly come up when it comes to the East Coast, um, is this like thought, the East Coast and the Midwest too, which I know you guys are in the Midwest, but is this, MSOs are really targeting to bring heavy presence on these emerging markets rather than competing on these established West Coast markets. That's a whole nother conversation itself. But there's this conversation of people that are from the culture equality that are like, the anti-MSO, we need craft. I think I've talked to a couple of people where like MSO is a tricky term because there are craft brands that are in 2 states. So by definition, they're a multi-state operator, and so I think MSOs, I don't know, it's a weird conversation, but do you think from your standpoint on the ground level, do consumers care? And I'm not here to bash MSOs or not, but do consumers care? Or does that conversation come up from patients or consumers very often, or do they not really as hip or care about it?
I think, I think that it's probably more, um, relevant to say like us, folks that have been around and understand like where we came from and what we had to do to get to where we are today. I think that it does, it there are some folks that kind of have like a preconceived and understanding. I think newer consumers might not understand um, the structure. I don't know that they are that ingrained or they're paying attention. I tend to think of this and only for my for the process of like how how I'm kind of breaking it down, but it's like I wish more people cared about where their food came from.
Mhm.
I wish more people cared about their shopping habits when it comes to apparel and what that does when you look at where that chain comes from, right? Like as with anything in any space, follow back to who is behind the company and do you support that? I think that again, this is a new space and like the advocates, we wanted to be able to create something that was a fair marketplace, that we came from a community perspective with craft cannabis. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything to honor this plant in the best possible way. And I think that there are, basic business structures and obviously the way that consumerism works and capitalism works and a lot of different factors that have kind of come to be. But, again, that's another conversation for another day. I just think that to answer your question, I don't know that the consumer, like the new consumer who's just experiencing cannabis, even knows what an MSO is.
Mm.
I think again to your point, like if you're a craft operator but you're in 2 states, you're considered an MSO. So like again, that term maybe doesn't, how do we differentiate between the level of ownership? Um, I worked for a multi-state operator prior. I worked at Harborside, and then I went and worked with Ianthus, and then I joined on the Berkshire Roots team as a locally owned operator in Massachusetts, and understanding that it's a little bit different when you're working for a public versus private company as well. And I think that people should do just like they do with their alcohol and everything else that they consume. Like do your due diligence and find
Mhm.
out who's manufacturing and doing that and where it's coming from. And again, like there's going to be people who do drive through Mickey D's and go on with their day. And that's okay too, to each their own and whatever works for them. So I don't know that it is as important, like when we are talking about it, or we're having a conversation with some of the OGs. I think it definitely comes from a different place.
Yeah, I think that's a lot, whether it's that conversation, the THC percent of conversation. I think a lot of us that are inside the industry, or OGs that have been around this for a long time, I think we often get caught in, an echo chamber, right? Of like, and you think these big topics, oh, it's such a hot topic. And it's like, it's just a hot topic of like people that have been around for 10 years on LinkedIn or in person. It's like you said, like the average consumer doesn't care, because that was something that, like, just looking around, that even myself realized, I think I had that realization this year, that conversation is more of an echo chamber, because you get so caught up in the industry. And especially over the last year, the majority of my conversations have only been on, through Zoom with people in the industry. And you don't get to touch as many of the people, or the people that are, kind of curious, if you will. And so that's a great outlook on it. And you put very well. So I'll give you props for that.
Thanks. And I mean, I hope that, we can see craft cannabis thrive. I really do, like, even just like, the farmer market idea, like just being able to have like a different landscape. Again, I think that we're really new when we're taking something that has been prohibited for so long and illegal in so many different ways. So I think that, in time, I think we will see some shifts and adjustments within the markets that hopefully are more advantageous for, some of that small batch cultivation that we're maybe looking for some aspects. And then, like I said, everybody that needs to go and drive through, like people run on Dunkin' Donuts around here,
Yeah.
I choose the local coffee shop whenever I possibly can.
Yeah, cannabis is going to inevitably, no matter what people would like to see, it's going to inevitably be like any other industry, where it's going to be highly commercialized. There's going to be your Mickey D's or your Budweisers or your Coca-Colas that own a huge portion of the market, but there's still going to be room for quality, handcrafted, local. People don't just buy, a lot of volume moves on price and accessibility, but there's a lot of people that, like you said, choose to spend their dollar, whether it's, I really support the cause, or this company, or just the locality of it, or someone might, I just like the way the box looks. Consumers buy different products for different reasons, and as long as they're happy, and as long as they're buying something, in my mind, as long as they're buying something that's transparent, and they're armed with the information to understand said product and trust it, even if I wouldn't buy it or not, more power to, let them be happy, man.
Exactly. Berkshire Roots, we definitely think of ourselves as like the craft beer. We're not the Bud Light, we're not the Coors Light. We really pride ourselves on working with the local community and doing what we can, like the coffee roastery. They're in West Stockbridge, which is 20 minutes south of where Pittsfield is, and that's like another local company. All of our every month we do a register roundup for different community and charity organizations, and we really try to focus on folks that are in our backyard and our neighborhoods, because we know that impact's going to be, really impactful, of course, for them. Of course, we also work with, larger chapters at a federal level too, like the Last Prisoners Project. It's not like that's a super hyper local initiative, but we recognize that that's important for us, to participate in on a national scale as well. But we really do try to pride ourselves on, in our East Boston location, we're squeezed in between these little buildings. We're the neighborhood dispensary. It's a hustle and bustle. Eastie is an awesome space with a lot of local folks who are coming into our doors, and we want to be thought of as that neighborhood dispensary. And in Pittsfield, like, even though we might see folks who are traveling a couple of hours to come visit us, we still have that vibe when you walk in, that it's like, it's not above where I am. It's not a below. It's not shady. It's exactly where I would expect me to be. I feel comfortable when I walk in here. And of course, we try to, put the crystals out and get some good vibes going in there like that as well. And the Berkshires has this amazing, I know you didn't get a chance to make it out because it's like 3 hours from Boston, but it does have a lot of beauty behind it. There's Greylock Mountain and a lot of elevation and natural elements, the beautiful, beautiful forests and valleys with gorgeous waterways. And all of that really kind of like captures this essence and vibe when you walk
Mm.
into our building and when you walk into our little retail spots. And we want that feel to go out through our, our agents, our associates, so that the customer has that beautiful experience. And it really comes back to that family mentality. Like, we're all working together and we're doing this thing to get, quality tested cannabis out to the customers. And we're a craft spot. We're not, we're not the big dogs.
Yeah, and I've heard good things about the Berkshires from some friends that live out in the area. And yeah, sadly, I was only in Massachusetts for like 50 hours. I think it was like
Yes.
slightly over 48 hours. But I look forward to getting out. I'm gonna go to I always have a hard time the west side, because on the west coast you can't go any more west where I'm at. So I have a hard time thinking of over here you go east, but over there you go west. So I
Yes.
look forward to getting back out to Massachusetts next year in 2022 and checking you guys out there at the flagship location. Is there anything that you guys have planned in 2022 that you can let the people know about?
Oh, well, I can tease a little bit. We're just really excited. I'm personally excited to kind of bridge those connections from the East Coast to the West Coast, because I think that that's something that, is just really amazing for us to be able to do. So, some tease on that. And we are going to continue to create new product lines, which we're really excited about. And we do want to host some more events. Obviously everything is, varied to what's going to be happening in the environment around us, but we do have that outside space. We're hoping to be able to bring in more local businesses and allow those folks to use our platform and our space and get introduced to our customers, and just bring some great elements to our folks in the dispensary as well. And just maybe winning some more awards. Our first time at the High Times Cannabis Cup this past year was the first official. We've had some other cups come to be as well, like the Cultivators Cup. So maybe we'll be able to win some more awards, which is really cool as well. But yeah, 2020, we got a bunch of stuff in store, so I'm really excited and looking into the new year.
Hell yeah, hell yeah. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us today, giving us insight of cannabis across your journey in the Massachusetts market. For you guys out there that are looking for more information on Berkshire Roots, it's berkshireRoots.com, and they have a location in Pittsfield and East Boston, or Eastie, as I now learned, the location in Boston. But Holly, I sincerely appreciate you hopping on the podcast and talking with us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm really excited to be on here, and I appreciate what you and Joey and all the crew are doing. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, we got more stuff to do. This is the North American Weed Tour podcast, episode 64. We're about to round out season 1 at 80 episodes, coming here in a week or two. So we'll catch you guys.